Howdy, all. It's Friday, and it probably will be tie day. We're waiting for our friend Ty Anderson to log in. But I was going to make a play for sympathy for myself and the people of Buffalo, since the temperatures are going to be in the minus, in the negative this weekend for the first time. It's been a pretty mild winter. But of course, I can't make a play for sympathy when I'm talking to somebody from Winnipeg because Peter, what did you say it was going to be this weekend?
With wind chill this morning, it was minus 39, and it was a bit of a shocker. But it's warmed up. It's only about minus 22, and tomorrow is the high is minus 16, which is like t-shirt weather.
Now remember, he's talking Celsius. I'm talking Fahrenheit, but minus 22 is probably around minus 2 or 3.
Yeah.
Fahrenheit. It's roughly that's the I know that we're talking 0 Fahrenheit, minus 2, minus 3 Fahrenheit. Luckily my car is parked in the garage. I hate to be somebody who parks on the street right now. And is it common? I keep hearing these stories about people in Winnipeg or people they have their cars plugged in to keep the battery.
Yeah. So when it gets really cold, if you park outside, you have a block heater, and it keeps basically the engine block warm, so your car turns over really easy and it doesn't drain your battery.
Wow. It's bad. Don't get me wrong. It's bad in Buffalo, and traditionally this winter has been knock on wood. This has been one of the better ones because last year we had, I think before Christmas we had about 7 feet of snow, and then we had a normal winter after that, and it was cold for 3 months. Or normally it's maybe cold for a month, and we've had days in January and December that was 60 degrees Fahrenheit. So it's been a mild winter, and we're in the middle of February. It's Valentine's Day on Sunday, and we're just getting our first cold snap. So if we can just get through the rest of this month and get into March and it starts to warm up, then we'll have escaped that bad winter. We deserved a light one after last year. But anyway.
Sure. Deserved.
All right, let's start the hockey, because everybody wants to hear about hockey. He doesn't want to hear about the goddamn weather. Oops, sorry. Hello, Hockey World. Today is Friday, February 12th, 2016.
Hi, I'm Pete Tessier, covering the Winnipeg Jets.
And I'm Michael Agello, and this is the HockeyBuzzcast here on HockeyBuzz.com. Well, it's been a really interesting Friday morning. A lot of stuff happening in the last 24 hours. We'll talk about Steven Stamkos' situation in Tampa in a minute. First thing is the reports coming out of Montreal this morning, which have been slightly refuted by the Montreal Canadiens. La Presse, the French newspaper in Montreal, was reporting that Carey Price was going to be shut down or was not going to be coming back for the remainder of the regular season or playoffs if they make the playoffs, which is not hard to believe based on the slow response he's had to rehabilitation from this knee injury that he had in November. Like I said, the Canadiens are in Buffalo to play the Sabres tonight, and Michel Therrien, the head coach of the Habs, sort of pushed back on that and said, well, he's working out, and I don't think he's working out to be like buff at the beach or something like that. That he's working out basically to get back. So, Peter, this is the thing. They're 3 points out of a playoff spot. If Price is out for the year, then teams that have goaltenders could maybe charge a little more to Marc Bergevin for a rental goaltender. Do you think that is why they're pushing back a little bit, because that they're in the race, they don't want to appear as being desperate for another goaltender in a trade?
Yeah, probably. I guess it's sort of the hard decision for Bergevin is it a throwaway year because your superstar goalie got injured? And if he doesn't come back, is it worth mortgaging anything to cling on to an 8th playoff space and spot and potentially get swept or just eliminated in the first round after even just winning one game? And that's the thing that I find curious about, and why go all in when it's kind of a throwaway season now if Price doesn't come back?
Well, and that might be the case. I mean, they've won 3 games in a row with Ben Scrivens in goal. They have him and Condon, and they played, well, Condon has played the majority of the games, but Scrivens broke that long losing streak, so they're sticking with him until they lose. Why not stick with the hot goaltender? But if they realistically think they have a chance to make the playoffs, I think they need to upgrade in goal because you're playing with guys who are basically two backups. Um, Ty, I know that on one of the previous Buzzcasts, our buddy Russ Cohen had floated the name of Jimmy Howard, whose name is out there. Now I believe he's on LTIR, but he's ready to come off. To me, that makes no sense for Montreal because the assumption will be that Price will be back healthy next year, and Jimmy Howard is locked up for another 3 years at over $5 million. Dallas is stupid to have over $10 million in goaltenders. I don't think Bergevin is that stupid.
Yeah, no, I mean, no doubt. I mean, Montreal's done a great job, I think, of in general with their cap and not overspending on certain guys in certain positions. And I think goaltending is the one you have to worry about the least. I mean, even with Price's situation right now, I mean, this is a guy who's going to be back next year at an elite level. You don't need a 1B. It's not that sort of team or that situation. So, Howard would make more sense for a team that thinks they're close but is lacking depth in net. But Montreal is not that team. Absolutely not. There are so many other issues that I think Bergevin has to address. I think the aging defense is a problem. Markov looks completely toasted, I think, as a player. Jeff Petrie hasn't had the year that he had sort of last year where they picked him up. So you need other guys to complement PK Subban. I do think that's number one for Montreal right now. But then again, what team doesn't need defense, it seems? So goaltending, definitely not the issue for Montreal, I think.
Mm-hmm. Now, Russ, when we were talking about this, said, he thinks that the Canadians need at least a 2-year goaltender, somebody for this year, somebody for next year, because the feeling is that maybe Price will not be completely 100%, and maybe they would want to limit the workload. I looked, I just simply looked through our Cap Central to see, potential guys like that who would fit. One I came up with was Jonathan Bernier, obviously from the Leafs, who's got another year left, but he's making over $4 million, so I don't think that's a fit. The other one is Pavlik, Peter. Now he's 3.9. He's lost $3.9 million. He's lost his job to Connor Hellebuyck. I'm sure that Winnipeg probably would be amenable to moving him because I think Hellebuyck is probably their number one goaltender next year. Is there anything going on in terms of Pavlik possibly being moved, or is that not even talked about?
The problem with Pavlik right now is he's injured, and now he is on the ice as we speak right now, working out. He is taken, and he's been on the ice for a little bit in the past few weeks, but now he's joining the team. I don't know if Kevin Cheveldayoff has the faith yet in a Hellebuyck Hutchinson duo to jettison Pavlik, although he'd probably love doing it to save salary.
Right.
And with Pavlik having one more year, I think he's happy to probably send Hutchinson down to the Moose if Pavlik comes back rather than trade him, unless there's something there he can get that betters his team. I don't think he would do it for the reasons of jettisoning the goalie, but if there's a player to come back who he covets, then he'd probably be open to it. I'm not a big Pavlik believer. I don't think he has the game that other possibilities for Montreal could have that exist. But you never know. He's used to being a number one, so maybe that's what they just need and to ride this out.
The other possibility, and I think this is the more likely, Ty, is the rental market. Now, Kari Ramo went down last night for Calgary, which means Jonas Hiller is probably their default starter now. They're going to call up Ordio from the AHL to be the backup in Calgary. Not that Calgary is in a realistic race for a playoff spot, but now that they only have one guy, they may. I don't think they're going to leave themselves vulnerable by trading the other healthy goaltender and have Ordio be the only guy for the rest of the year. But the two more prominent rentals right now are Cam Ward in Carolina and James Reimer in Toronto. I know for a fact that there were Toronto scouts in Montreal for the two games on last weekend. There's no proof that it has to do with Reimer or has to do with whatever. Toronto is going to be making a lot of trades, but to me, the rental direction, if Price is out for the year, makes the most sense. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And, I know it sounds crazy saying this, 3 years ago, but if there's a goaltender I could get, I mean, it's James Reimer over Cam Ward. I think what James Reimer has done for the Maple Leafs, and given the sort of ineptitude of that entire roster, to watch Reimer and the performances that he's put together, I think speaks volumes. And that's a perfect guy, I think, for Montreal to get based on the fact that he knows the division, he knows the conference, and he's been pretty damn good this year. I mean, and I think that's what makes it so impressive. In the past, we'd see Reimer have these great games where, he would stop 34 or 36, but then the next night he'd struggle. This, you're seeing a lot more of the 34 or 36 nights than you did before. And maybe it's just he's become accustomed to playing behind that team. He knows what he's going to face every night. But this has been a goaltender that every time I've caught him this year, I've been pretty impressed for the most part, especially, like I said, given what he's playing with. So if I'm a team that needs a goaltender, especially the Montreal Canadiens, I look at James Reimer as my number one target just because you know what you're going to get there. You've seen him enough. He knows the division well. I think that would absolutely work out for both sides.
And Reimer or Ward is making his cap hit is $6.3 million. So
yeah,
for Montreal to take him in a deal or bring him in a deal, Carolina is going to have to retain a lot of salary, and they may not want to do that, but they may have to do that to get an asset. Reimer's cap hit is 2.3. And from the Toronto point of view, there's some speculation that they may want to keep Reimer around as that transitional goaltender through the rebuild, but it depends on what he wants in terms of a contract. If he wants 5-6 years like Devin Dubnyk, which is the speculation that's been coming out recently, I don't think they're gonna. What I think they're gonna do is they'll trade him, and then maybe they'll let him test the market in the summer, and if he comes down from that and willing to take a 2 or 3 year deal, then they would re-sign him like they re-signed Daniel Winnick. But Peter, if you don't want to sign a goaltender to a 5 or 6 year contract and you're close to the deadline and you're basically at this point of the season going for 30th place, which we know the Leafs are doing, you're trading Reimer.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to trade anything else that you can get rid of. I mean, that's what they're doing. Just who's the market for Reimer? Someone who wants a potential, goalie who can back up, but also win games if called upon. So you're probably a cup contender. You're a wannabe one. What would Nashville think about Reimer?
Well, it's funny. It's funny you bring that up because I know that Elliot Friedman last Saturday on Hockey in Canada said, Pekka Rinne has been playing below Pekka Rinne standards, and save percentage is slightly over 900, and that he's a better goaltender when he's pushed by somebody, and that maybe a Reimer would be an answer for that. Come in. Give him a rest. Let him play a few games. Get some, hopefully get some wins. You're right on the border of making or missing the playoffs. So even though Carter Hutton, who's one of X's favorite goaltenders, is actually statistically having a pretty decent year, he's a backup goaltender. Whereas Reimer has been a starter for the majority of his career. I mean, that does make sense. I mean, the other thing with Montreal, if Toronto's point of view is we want to re-sign this guy in the summer, Montreal's not going to re-sign James Reimer if they trade him. They have Condon under contract. They have Price making, I think over $6 million. They're not going to pay James Reimer what he's looking for in free agency. So it would strictly be a rental, him going someplace and then being on the market. And then if Toronto wants him, they can bid on him. But to me, it makes a lot of sense. There's no guarantee, and it makes almost as much sense with Carolina trading Cam Ward, but this is all dependent on whether Montreal stays in the race up to February 29th. I mean, Ty, you've seen them as much as I have seen them.
Yeah.
They've only started to pull out of this in the last week. They're 3 points out of a playoff spot. I think it's possible they can stay in the race, but they've just been so wildly inconsistent this year.
Yeah, and I think it comes back down to if you don't have carry, you're not competing. I think that's what it comes back down. I mean, that's ultimately what this whole season comes back down to for Montreal. It's what's come down to the last 3 to 4 seasons, for that matter. Without Carey Price, they fold. And I mean, listen, when I say this, I like James Reimer. I think he could be the guy, but unless they make a move to get a goaltender, I don't think that this nice little 3 or 4 game win streak, whatever it is, it's gonna crumble. I mean, that's exactly what's gonna happen. I'm not a Montreal hater per se. I just don't like their team without Carey Price in net, and I think that's how a lot of people feel. They just don't look good without him in net. And I think when it comes down to what Montreal is, they win that game over Tampa Bay. That looked like the Montreal that you're accustomed to seeing. They were clogging the lanes, really, really flustering the Tampa Bay defensemen. They were opportunistic. When they did get their chances, they capitalized, and they relied on the back of a goaltender. And I think Scrivens ended the night with 37 saves, I want to say. If you shoot 39 times on Ben Scrivens, he's going to give up more than 2 goals more often than not. And that's the reality of the situation. So unless something drastically improves with Montreal's defense or their own zone game in general, it's gonna have the effects on Ben Scrivens more than it would Carey Price.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen Ben Scrivens play in the American Hockey League. He's a good guy, really intelligent kid, and played well for the Marlies, played well for the LA Kings when he was playing in front of a defense that was one of the best in the NHL, but was exposed in Edmonton with one of the worst defenses in the NHL. Montreal is, I'd say, in between right now. I don't think they're the best. I don't think they're the worst. But he's capable of carrying a team in a short stretch, but not. I don't think for the remaining 28, 29 games that they have left, they can go with Ben Scrivens and make the playoffs. I think and Mike Condon has done yeoman's work, but I think he's a backup goaltender. So I think if they're going to make a run for the playoffs and they're only 3 points out, I mean, from what I understand, the whole reason that they're saying that Price may not be out is they don't want people to quit on the team. They don't want people not showing up at the Bell Center. They don't want the fan base to start getting antagonistic. Woe is me, the Canadians are done. They want to keep things positive. They want to make the playoffs, and if they make the playoffs, even if they lose in the first round, the year isn't a total loss. I get that. And if I don't think the cost for James Reimer would be prohibitive. I don't think the cost for Cam Ward would be prohibitive. I think it would be a draft pick. I think it would be a 3rd round pick or maybe a prospect. So if that's the cost, I don't think that's too much to pay to get into the playoffs. But I mean, we'll see. Did you have one more point, Peter?
I was just going to say, I mean, go back to the beginning of the season when Montreal got off that hot start. Mm-hmm. Price was playing unconscious hockey. Mm-hmm. But good goaltending hides problems. Great goaltending basically eliminates them. And that's what Price was doing. I mean, the removal of Price from the Canadians has just opened up a whole host of other things that people are picking apart and realizing. The guy was just stopping everything, but they weren't a great team. They had a great record. And if you're Marc Bergevin, why mortgage too much to hold on to something that's maybe broken that you have to fix in a deeper way? And I think that's probably what he's wrestling with right now.
Right. Well, yeah, I mean, it has been my contention, and from what Ty just said, his contention, that they are an average team without Carey Price. I've always said they're a 500 team without Carey Price. I was wrong. They're a 300 team without Carey Price because that's what they're playing around that record since he's gone down. I think they're a better team than they're actually playing. They've actually played the last quarter of the season, but psychologically maybe they just needed that goaltender back there to stop everything for them to be able to take chances and generate enough offense to win games. But they've fed into that narrative that they are not good without Carey Price. I think it's accurate. So we'll see. I mean, personally, I think they have to make the goaltender trade if they make it earlier than the 29th. I think they need to make it probably this weekend or maybe early next week because they can't afford to go back into a slump and lose the points they could potentially lose in the next couple weeks. So we'll see what Bergevin decides to do. Want to move on to Steven Stamkos, and Ty. This has gotten interesting in the last 24 hours because, and I'll first, let's talk about the report that came out of Tampa Bay, and then I want to talk about all the stuff that came out of Toronto this morning. In the Tampa Bay Times, Joe Smith writes an article about Stamkos, quotes Stamkos saying, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it regarding the no trade clause, the no move before February 29th, what is going on with the contract situation. We've heard nothing out of either Newport Sports or the Lightning since that $8.5 million offer from last month. Everybody I've talked to thinks that offer is either an opening offer or a by the way offer that they can say, well, at least we made an offer, because it's not even realistic. And Don Meehan, his agent, was talking on a radio station in Toronto, and said that the negotiations with the Lightning had been professional and have had progress, but there's no sign of it. So it sounds like Stamkos is leaving the door open for trade before February 29th.
Yeah, it would seem that way. My only thing is, I can't see it. Just because I think the Lightning have played so well. They've really come around back to what they were a year ago. And Stamkos has been a part of that. I know he's playing the wing with Nemestikov from the top line right now, which is something he's not crazy about. But he has done it for John Cooper's team for over 2 years now, it seems. So I look at this. This would be Steve Yzerman saying, basically bailing on the season. In a lot of ways, no matter the return, it's not going to be that of Steven Stamkos. It's not going to have the impact that Steven Stamkos can have on your team. And that's what makes it so tough for me to buy into that, because I think realistically Yzerman looks at this season as maybe their last run because of the uncertainty that comes with Stamkos' contract and the future. Bob McKenzie last night talks about Buffalo being on his list, maybe of go-to teams, and that kind of came out of left field. You always heard that in the background, but you didn't think it was actually serious. But if Bob is saying it, we know there's some pretty good linkage to that, no doubt. So it's so confusing. I cannot see the Lightning making that trade before the deadline, just because it does throw your chance of this year out the window. And so much, I think, is riding on this year being the final run, if you will, because after this, they don't have a top-line center, they don't have a top-line scorer, however you want to phrase it, without Stamkos. So while I understand the sentiment, I just don't think they do it.
Well, Peter, I don't put anything past Steve Yzerman, because a couple years ago, last year, excuse me, when 2 years ago, when they made the trade for Ryan Callahan in the St. Louis deal, they had no negotiating position. They had no leverage. St. Louis wanted to go one place, New York, and they got Callahan. They got a first-round pick. They re-signed Callahan. It ended up being a deal that they, with limited options, got a great return on. In this instance, if there is no, let's look at it this way. If Stamkos is leaving the door open to a no-move clause, to waiving it and going someplace else, then obviously the negotiations are going nowhere with Tampa, and he's looking for someplace where he can make a run for a Stanley Cup to use as a stage to promote his free agency on July the 1st. Is it likely? No, I don't think so. I think he's staying with Tampa. But, what is your read on the situation? Because it sounds to me like they're keeping their options open.
I think they have to, but who's going to want to pay the price and then think the player you're getting, if you built a team that's contending and then you have to acquire Steven Stamkos to put you over the top, what's the price for that, and how does it disrupt what you've already built? That's what I don't understand. And there's someone who will figure it out, who's works as a NHL GM and sees hockey a lot differently and probably better than I do. But someone will figure it out and do it if the option comes. But I like what what Ty said. I just don't think it's going to happen. I think Yzerman's going to go back to Jeff Vinnick, is it, and say the salary starts with a 1 and it has a number after it, then a comma. Let's just get this done, and they're going to get it done.
Yeah.
And I just
what's interesting in all of this is that Rob DeMaio, who works for the Blues and their development and sort of their player personnel, has been following the Lightning around for a month, if not more. Jonathan Drouin is not playing for the Tampa Bay Lightning anymore, so he's not watching Drouin, which makes me wonder who he is watching, because we've linked Shattenkirk to the Lightning on numerous occasions now. So if Rob DeMaio is following the Lightning around for a month, maybe the Blues are saying, hey, Steven Stamkos, maybe we can make a move to get this guy. And maybe the Blues can shed some of their heavier contracts for their older players and develop that package. Maybe that's a Shattenkirk and Alex Steen and somebody else. You know, I mean, that's not a horrible package. It's not ideal, I don't think, for the Lightning, given what they're losing.
Right.
But you have to wonder if there's a home run being built, by the Blues with Rob DeMaio following this team around.
Shattenkirk and David Backus. He's a UFA, maybe. I mean, that's possible.
And more.
And more.
And
yes.
more.
But the thing is, I mean, even if he gets traded to the Blues, I don't think the Blues are going to pony up $11 million. I mean, to me, I think if he gets traded, if he stays, it's too close to July 1st to not say, okay, I know the best value I'm going to get is to test the market. And if I'm going to test the market, I have to go to July 1st. I don't, there's one team that I think would pay him, would trade for his negotiating rights and trade him and pay him more than Patrick Kane and Jonathan Toews, and we know who that team is. And I'll talk about that in a second. But throwing something against the wall, this is just theory. This is not a rumor. This is not anything I've heard. I'm just taking into consideration that the two teams had traded before. And what about Rick Nash for Steven Stamkos? Because I think the Rangers are looking to get from out under Rick Nash's deal. He's making basically the same amount of money as Stamkos is for another 2 years. He's still a good player. He's not as good a player as he used to be, but the Rangers might think they have a chance to sign Stamkos long term, but even if they don't, they clear the money for Nash for the next 2 years, and then they'd be able to sign a Yandel, sign a Kreider. They'd clear some cap space, and they desperately need to do that, and then maybe they let Stamkos walk, and they would take their run at the Stanley Cup this year because they really have to this year. I think that's as plausible as a St. Louis deal or a deal to Montreal or a deal to Anaheim. I don't know. I mean, like I said, I'm not making that. I'm not making up a rumor. I haven't heard that. I'm just saying it sort of adds up, and it wouldn't be totally out of left field. But I mean, we'll see. I don't think there's a chance he's getting traded, but I think this is all smoke. But Ty, this is what's coming out of Toronto. You mentioned the McKenzie report with regarding Buffalo. I mean, it was during the TSN intermission, and they said, what's the number one destination for Stamkos? And he's going under the assumption that Stamkos doesn't want to come to Toronto, doesn't want to be at the head of the circus, doesn't want to be the central focus of Toronto and all that goes with it. Nobody knows whether that's the case or not. I would never dispute anything Bob McKenzie says because he's very well respected. I respect him, and he's very well connected in the league. But I know from Buffalo's situation, they're just as far away from winning as Toronto is. They have Eichel and Reinhart and Ristolainen, but they're nowhere closer to being a championship-level team as Toronto. And I don't think they want to spend $11 million on one player when they're going to have to spend money on Eichel and Ristolainen and Reinhart in a year or two. So I don't know how realistic that is.
Yeah, I don't know. I just like. Because I look at what the Sabres are doing versus what the Leafs are doing, and I just feel like there's a bit more structure in Buffalo. But then I think about it, like I look at it closely, and I go, no, they're kind of on the same path. It would seem, it's just that the Sabres, I think their pieces are a bit more NHL ready, or they're already there in a way between Eichel and Evander Kane and Ristolainen versus. A lot of what the Leafs have is sort of hinged on Nylander and Mitch Marner right now. Neither of those guys are in Toronto, so it seems to be a bit it seems farther away, I guess you'd say.
Right.
So, and I like Morgan Riley and Jake Gardner as well. I mean, I think those are some two guys you can build around. Maybe they're not going to be your number one and number two, but those are guys that I think definitely have a future in top four. So maybe they are. Maybe it's a lot closer than we think in terms of where these teams are at. But you're right in the sense that neither of them are going to compete for a Stanley Cup next season. It's really about the long-term scope, I think, and I think it would honestly come back down to, all right, if Steven Stamkos goes to Buffalo, he's the star of Buffalo, yes, but I don't know if he has people waiting outside his apartment in all black taking photos of him, through a window. But then again, that's Montreal, so maybe both cities would be okay. But I think that there's a lot of pressure. I think that comes. I've written this now. I think when you talk about Stamkos in Toronto, yes, it has a chance for him to be the storybook sort of hero, where comes to his hometown, brings a cup back to the city for the first time in 60 years, whatever it is, 50, 60 years. And at the same time, it's very hard to do that, I think, because of the pressure internally and externally. And just you can go from being the hero to a GOAT really quickly. I think David Clarkson learned that. And Clarkson is not Stamkos. We all know that, of course. But doesn't always have that fairy tale ending.
Well, and Peter, I think I agree with what you said, Ty, but I think the difference is Mike Babcock and Lou Lamoriello, especially this year. There was literally no granted, everybody, the expectations in Toronto were finish in last place. They're going to finish in 30th. They traded Kessel. There's no expectation of the playoffs. Nothing's going on. But no big pressure on Dion Phaneuf while he was there. Babcock sort of diffused all that. We're going to protect our players. We're going to make it safe for our players. That's what he said in his opening press conference. And in general, he's done that. There hasn't been any attacks on players like Ron Wilson used to do, throwing them under the bus. Randy Carlyle really didn't do that, but every once in a while there would be insinuations. Babcock was very protective of his players and sheltering of his players, and I think that if Stamkos did go to Toronto would help him in terms of the pressure. But the question is whether he wants that or not, whether he wants to be the center of attention in the big smoke or not.
I think he might want to, but if he and I guess the alleged rift between him and Cooper and positioning is, there's reports that it's nothing. There's reports that it is. That's going to happen with Babcock too. Like, Babcock's got a system. He's got a way he wants things done. And he's going to want players to play in certain positions and ways in certain scenarios. And Stamkos is going to have to understand that too. I mean, he's got experience with Babcock in terms of, through Hockey Canada. He understands what he would be getting into, but it's different when it's full time. Right. And that's it. And then the grind of the center of attention and the grind of the focus and stuff. Yeah, that's a very good question. I'd be very curious to know what a player and his agent really think about when they start looking to the market and saying, how do we come to arrive at our choices of what's the best place? Take the dollars out of it, because that's a consideration too. I mean, he's tasted a Stanley Cup final. I mean, signing in Toronto means you're probably 5 years out from getting back to that level at a minimum. So is that the right move? Do you want to wait 5 years? How old is Stamkos when this is done? 20?
He just turned 26.
26. Yeah. So he's still coming in. So 31. He'll still be a decent player. Will he be a 28-year-old Steven Stamkos? Probably not. We won't be a 26-year-old, but some guys defy that age thing and keep going. He's got bigger issues than just the center of attention. He's got to think about winning and where his best opportunity is. You talked about the rebuild between, comparison between Buffalo and Toronto. Buffalo sort of started a little earlier, in my opinion. I think they're a little further ahead than that. But the swift precision that Shanahan and Lamoriello have come in now is remarkable in how decisive they've been and what they've done. So they're really good at cutting. Now we've got to see how good they are at patching and filling and building.
Right.
And that's sort of the next step. And I'm curious if Stamkos becomes part of that or not. And will it make sense to even go down that road if they know it's 5 or 6 years before it becomes reality that they're going to be a contender.
Well, just comparing them side by side, and I won't elaborate too much on this. Toronto had, by a lot of experts looking at it, had a phenomenal 2015 draft. I mean, Marner, I don't know if he's going to be a star, but he's going to be a good NHL player. Travis Dermott, their second-round pick, Dmitry Timashov, who starred for Sweden in the World Juniors, a very good draft. You know, you can't criticize Buffalo. Eichel is going to be a Rookie of the Year candidate. They have Reinhart. But the depth of the organization is a little bit in question right now. Their AHL team is not doing well. They don't have a lot of prospects down there. They have some prospects in Sweden and in college, but you know the depth of the organization. And as you said, Peter, Lamoriello and Shanahan, and we have to give a little bit of credit to former GM Dave Nonis, in the span of 12 months have cleared out $20 million of Clarkson, Phaneuf, and Kessel, and the only thing remaining on the books after next season is $1.2 million of the retained money for Kessel. Whereas if you look at the Sabres, they've got bad contracts in Brian Giunta. They re-signed Matt Molson, who hasn't scored a goal since November. They have Zach Bogosian, who is not doing anything. Evander Kane is underachieved. I mean, there's a lot of dead money going on in Buffalo right now. So, I mean, yes, I think Buffalo is ahead of where Toronto is, but I think Toronto has really cleaned up things a lot better than Buffalo has in the last year or so. Now, Ty, the interesting thing is this morning, Darren Drager comes out with his report and says there's only a remote chance that Stamkos signs with Toronto because where Toronto is right now in the rebuild, and they've traded Phaneuf. They're probably going to trade a bunch of players, and why would he go to a team that's in the midst of a teardown, which is the same thing we heard out of a lot of people about Babcock around this time last year. So you could choose to believe it or not to believe it. And that's TSN. McKenzie and Drager both on TSN saying that. On the other network, Sportsnet, their morning radio show host named Dean Blundell, who is not an insider by any stretch of the imagination, but last year called Babcock going to Toronto, cited a source, said that he would be signed for over $6 million a year for a long term, and it ended up happening. The same source that told him that said that Stamkos is coming to Toronto, and the Toronto was willing to pay him $11 to $12 million a year.
Yeah.
You can choose to believe who you want to believe. We're not going to know what's going to happen probably till the draft, but this is going to go on, and I don't know whether it's going to get straightened out before February 29th. I just think that if it gets to the deadline and he's still in Tampa Bay, he's gone.
Yeah, and I mean, I've said it from the start that it would, I think, not testing the market and not seeing what was out there and what some of these teams would be willing to offer you would be insane. It'd be horrible advice, I think, from his agent. I mean, because listen, even if he tests the market, I think the Lightning would still come to him with an offer. I mean, it might not be as great as Team X, Y, and Z, but I think that door would still be open because Eisman would be a fool to close that door. So I think that, this is going to end with him testing the market. That's honestly how I feel. I could be wrong, and the extension could be done next week. It's happened before.
Right.
But I just think that rarely does a free agent of this magnitude ever hit the open market. And I think with the new structure and the new sort of, layout of the NHL with the CBA, the idea that, he's not going to get a 15-year deal,
right? But
he can get a bunch of 6 or 7 year deals with varying degrees of, what you consider max payments. If it's that $10.5 million or that 11, I think that's going to be something interesting to see. And he has to see that for himself. He has to have a look at all these teams, these 6 or 7 teams at least, that would be interested in his services and what they're willing to pay. And then from there, you determine, okay, where do I have the best chance to win a Stanley Cup?
Peter, the only thing that I think that is in Stamkos' mind regarding Tampa, and then we'll move on to something else, is if Tampa offers him, say, 10.5, say they offer him the same thing that Taves and Kane are offered, the team that's there right now is not going to be the team that's there next year, because to sign him to a $10.5 million contract, they're probably going to have to either trade off a guy like Bishop and go with Vasilevsky as their number one to save money, or they're going to have to trade, Filppula or Callahan or Kucherov, who needs big money. They're going to have to probably trade 2 or 3 pieces to be able to afford Stamkos. So the fallacy out there that it's a choice of staying with Tampa, that team that is on the verge of winning a Stanley Cup, or going to a rebuilding situation like a Toronto or a Buffalo, I think it's inaccurate, because if he re-signs in Tampa, it's not going to be the same team.
No, it's not, and that's the perils of taking a lot of money. You take it from here, you give it up over there. That's the market. That's one of those decision processes too. You know what? I mean, I'm sure his agent and he have maybe asked Yzerman, what happens if we do this deal? How do you fit this together? What does the team look like? I'd be asking that question. Right. What's your plan to keep us competitive for the next 5 years if we do a 5-year deal, 6 years, 7 years? How do you manage this? Mm-hmm. And they should be asking that. They should be asking that with any team, though.
Yeah. Now, Boston played Winnipeg last night, and we had a bout between those two noted pugilists, Patrice Bergeron and Blake Wheeler. Ty, is there really animosity between those two guys when they played with the Bruins?
I mean, not off the top of my head. I mean, Wheeler was always, when Wheeler was here, he was a young guy that was still developing. He wasn't anything close to the Wheeler that you see in Winnipeg. I mean, this guy is taking gigantic strides forward in his career. And it's pretty impressive when you think about the package that I think was sent to Atlanta at the time. It was Blake Wheeler and Mark Stewart for Rich Peverley and Boris Valavic, if you remember him, the 6'8" defenseman who couldn't play at all. But that was the package that was sent, and at the time everyone was like, oh, fine, those two guys being Stewart and Wheeler weren't going to amount to anything here. And then you see Wheeler now in Winnipeg, and you can't help but be impressed. But no animosity. I think it's just a case of Bergeron's team is falling flat. They had just lost 9-2 the night before, and you get that spark going. And from that point on, the Bruins really seemed to take over the game. I think they held Winnipeg to 6 shots in the third period. Much tighter defensive effort than what you were used to. And I mean, this was kind of a chippy game all around, but this is one that the Boston Bruins sort of needed, especially after the way they lost to LA on Tuesday night.
Right. I wanted to ask you about that quickly, because then I want to talk about Winnipeg and come back to you. But Lucic coming back for the first time, I know he wrote a piece in the Players Tribune. Was it a weird sight to see him in the gold and purple of the Kings, and how was the reaction at the TD Garden?
It was, it's funny. It was the loudest the building has been all year long. Was for Milan Lucic coming back to town, and that sort of speaks volumes. I think both how this team has played this year at home, how they miss Lucic, and how thirdly, and I think most importantly, they miss the identity that the team had when Milan Lucic was in town. You talk to people, they talk to the casual fan. They think the Bruins are soft. They think they're just not a mentally tough team. They're not a physically tough team. They crumble at the first sign of pressure or danger. And, in a way, I'm inclined to agree with that, because this team, every time they're challenged or they're pressed with the challenge of going up against a great team, they crumble, they fold. They got their doors blown off by Anaheim. And then they grind out wins against Buffalo and Toronto, and then they get absolutely crushed by LA. So Lucic's reaction, I mean, the building goes nuts when he scores a goal for LA to make it 7-1, I think, at the time, whatever it was, 5-1, I forget. So many goals in that game, it's kind of hard to remember the order in which they were scored. But no, I mean, that was the loudest the building has been all year, and I think it just showed that the fans don't necessarily agree with what the front office thinks about this team right now, and that was sort of the best example of it. You hear the gripes about the Sagan trade and the Boychuk trade, of course, but it really seemed that this was one the fans hated to see the most, I think, just because of what he meant to the city and what the team was when he was here.
Flipping to Winnipeg here, Peter, the news earlier in the week regarding Dustin Byfuglien signs a 5-year contract, $7.6 million per. Seemed to be a good, a good agreement for both sides. They didn't dole out the 8-year term, but he probably got a little more money than a lot of people expected. I thought he was going to get $7 million on a longer-term deal, so 7.6 for 5 years. It seems to be a good compromise. Now we wonder what's going to happen with Andrew Ladd. There's a question of, if negotiations are going on, and also the situation with Trouba. What can you tell me about either one?
The Ladd one's curious. It's kind of the hot button one, because if there's no deal done, I can't believe you'd be here past the trade deadline, and I don't think you'd want to be, actually, tell you the honest truth. But the interesting thing with Ladd is the rumors out there that come in, and I think Elliot Friedman has said this, and I might be wrong, but I think it's also Bob McKenzie too, who said they're about $750,000 apart, but we don't know where that 750 is. Is it 6 to 750, or is it 5.5 to 2.25? No one really knows what starting number on that is, so that's sort of a challenge as to where that's going. The other thing, the last one, and going to Trouba with numbers, the last one that I saw was that it was a tweet, and I think it was someone quoting or mentioning Darren Dredger, and he's saying that Trouba is looking at 6 and 6.5, which is a little different than what Tim Campbell of the Winnipeg Free Press had put out when he put out his big sort of contract number thing with Byfuglien, Ladd, and Trouba in an article earlier this year, and talking about a number of around $7 million. So I often say with Trouba, in this case, is his number high because that's what it's going to cost for me to play in Winnipeg, and I'd rather be someplace else. And I think there's a fair bit of that. I think, he's a Michigan boy. I think he'd love to go back and play for the Red Wings or in that area. Maybe even Columbus, for all we know. You don't know. But the interesting thing is that the Ladd thing just keeps dragging out. He doesn't seem to have much for answers either. It's like he either knows something he doesn't want to talk about, or he's frustrated and he doesn't want to talk about his frustrations. But he seems at a loss to understand what's going on. And it would make sense too, because I guess the Dustin Byfuglien talks didn't really heat up till last week, and boom, then it was done. It's a good deal, I think, for the Jets, because it's only 5 years, but it's a costly one. Years 4 and 5 could be real ugly. But as we just saw with Phaneuf, maybe you can trade it and retain some salary if you got to get out of it, if there's a winner for him. I mean, if there's a reason for him to want to go to a winner, maybe you can do it if you're prepared to eat a little bit. Ladd's curious. There's half the city in Winnipeg wants to run him out of town. They're tired of him. He's a third-line winger. He doesn't need to act like a captain. Strip the C off his chest, give it to Wheeler. Wheeler shows emotion. Wheeler gives good quotes to the media. Give it to him. And Ladd doesn't do anything anymore. Why isn't he scoring? He doesn't pass. He plays on the third line. It's just bizarre. And it's sort of an unfortunate thing. But I don't think it's atypical as to how Ladd's career's gone. He's been deemed expendable from 2 cup-winning teams twice. Doesn't that tell us something? Doesn't that say something about Andrew Ladd too that maybe we need to pay attention about?
Yeah, but he was very early in his career when he got moved by Carolina. So yeah. I mean, in Chicago, obviously the way they operate, it's the core, nothing but the core. So if they didn't deem him part of the core, which that's what they decided, yes, he gets shipped to Atlanta or Winnipeg.
I understand the logic behind it, but wouldn't Andrew Ladd, when he was at Carolina, and I know we're going sort of post-first lockout, we didn't quite have the emphasis on youth then as we do now. Right. But isn't that the kind of guy you say, I want to keep him around for a bit? I mean, it's just an interesting thing. And I guess having spoken to someone else about this who knows some people in Chicago, I guess there was a bit of it's not a falling out because they are friends, but there was a bit of a division in power between Ladd and Taze in Chicago. Ladd wanted to have more of a say in leadership there, but it was going to Taze, and there was believed to be not a falling out, but a sort of a
difference of opinion.
A difference of opinion, and a parting of the ways, saying, okay, that's the way we're going to go, which I think is interesting too. And I think all of a sudden, at least in the fans of Winnipeg, you're seeing that as well now. But you don't hear other players talk about Ladd's contract when they're asked. They don't say, Byfuglien signed his deal. Shane Knighty happened to be there. He's taking photos of all the guys coming up around him and hugging him and high-fiving him on the ice in the middle of practice after Maurice let it be known. I don't think that would happen with Ladd. I think I get the sense that there'd be like, yeah, he's here, but I don't get the sense it would be like a heartfelt moment across the team. Guys would be happy, hey, a fella's getting paid, but not like what Byfuglien had. And that's an interesting thing, too, in some regards.
Well, I know that the talk had been that he was looking for the equivalent of a Kessler deal, and Kessler, I think, signed for just under $7 million. I don't think he's getting that from Winnipeg, so that leads me to believe that. And I had heard there was a $6 million 6-year offer or 5-year offer to Ladd. You know, if that's the case and they're that far apart, I think he's getting moved. It's just a question of what they can get for him.
Yeah.
And, you know, to me, him playing the third line doesn't help them improve their value in a trade because he's not scoring. So
I wrote today that there's, again, because it never seems to be a topic that goes away, there's a fundamental problem with the Jets, and it's not about the coach anymore. I mean, it is about the coaching, but it's the players, it's the group, it's the mix. The team, it doesn't work. So if you've committed to Byfuglien, why would you commit to Ladd?
Right.
Like it's time to cut ways, not because he's Andrew Ladd, but because something's not there working. And if you're already, you know, you're the 25th worst team in the NHL, that's too close to ignore the chance of what the great top five picks are available in this year's draft. You've got to go and say, I've got to make sure I'm getting one of those, and I've got to get something for this guy. And that's the direction they should be going because it's not working right now.
Last question about the Jets, and I want to go to talk about the Bruins for a sec. You know, if Trouba sticks to that $6.5 million, which is what, you know, all these, you know, that's what Dougie Hamilton was looking for probably from the Bruins, and took actually a little less to go someplace like Calgary where, you know, he just wanted to get out of Boston. And maybe Boston didn't want to pay him that much. You know, I mean, there's a slight possibility of a trade here, but do you think that they would move out an Enstrom, or could move out an Enstrom to make financial room for signing Trouba long term?
Yeah, there's two trains of thought with that. There are people who want to do that. Enstrom's got 2 years left at 5.75, so he's not unaffordable. He's a great puck mover. He's smart, but some people have a bias against Enstrom because he's very small. He's not a big defenseman, but he can move the puck. And if you're building the right kind of team, he could be appealing to it. The other train of thought with Trouba is the Jets love cost certainty. They love things. They love Meyer's deal because it was a high cap hit and a low actual annual salary. I'm wondering if they would actually revisit in the offseason trading Trouba for Hamonic, because of the same kind of thing as affordability. I still think that's an option that isn't going to go away until a deal for Hamonic is done and it either includes Trouba or not. I think, you know, Chevy's job is to not pay as much as that, but I think as time moves on, Canadian dollar stays a little lower, he might reconsider that, or his owner might tell him to.
Yeah, I think it's 3.8.
Yeah.
In the next 5 or 6 years. And the Islanders got a ton of prospects like Del Cole and Ryan Strome and a few others. That'd probably be a bigger deal than just 1-for-1. But that makes a lot of sense. Ty, with the Bruins, they're in the playoffs right now. There continues to be talk about Louis Eriksson. It sounds to me like there's little chance he's going to stay past the deadline. Is it strictly moving Eriksson and to get a defenseman? Is that what the goal is?
Yeah, I mean, in a lot of ways, I think that's absolutely what they're looking for. I think just based on where the team is at right now, the fact that Louis Eriksson's probably not going to re-sign. The Bruins would have liked to have kept him for about 3 to 4 years. They were willing to go $6 million, but when it comes back that you're talking 5-6 years at $6 million, maybe even a little bit more,
right.
The Bruins really they aren't in the business of doing that. Just based on where they are right now as a team, I think that. I've written this that Don Sweeney is hell-bent on not making the same mistakes that Peter Chiarelli did. Now, if Chiarelli was still in town, Louis Eriksson would have been re-signed already to a very heavy contract with a lot of years. Or they wouldn't trade him, and they lose him for nothing in the offseason, which is what happened with Carl Soderberg, basically. They could have gotten a first-round pick and a prospect for Soderberg. They thought they could win. They hung on to Soderberg. They ended up trading him for a 6th-round choice to Colorado, which was their own pick, by the way. They traded in the Max Talbot deal. So you didn't really get anything from that. So they don't want to make those same mistakes, and that's what it comes back down to. So, but here's the problem, and I've heard this now, is that teams aren't necessarily lining up to give Boston a first-round pick for Louis Eriksson because they understand that they're going to get 2 months of him, and is he that game changer for a lot of teams? Probably not. He's a game changer for the Boston Bruins because they're thin on the wings. But if you're a team that's legitimate cup contenders, I mean, he's probably your third or fourth best winger. And I think that's why the trade market is a bit different than it has been in years past, where I think even LeBron touched on this, where teams, they aren't necessarily giving away first-round picks like they used to. Right. And that's sort of what you've heard when it comes to Louis Eriksson, that teams aren't giving the Boston Bruins, the young defenseman that they want, which I don't blame them. It's 2 months of a 30-year-old winger with concussion history. And B, the first-round pick isn't there. So then you go, all right, what's the ultimate return? If you're not gonna re-sign him, you have to trade him. You have to trade him, but it's sort of like, what can you really get? What's acceptable for you? And that's what the Boston Bruins are sort of wrestling with right now. I think is that they'd like to move this player and/or re-sign him, but it's just the market and the trades haven't been what they wanted. They think too many teams are still in it, and I include the Bruins in that grouping personally. Too many teams think they can still make a run in the Eastern Conference, so the trade market itself has kind of cooled down, at least from the Eriksson point of view. It seems like a team like Nashville would be the best fit, but they're not moving one of their core pieces for Louis Eriksson. No way.
They're not moving another defenseman. There's no way after trading Jones.
And that's what I think that's what it comes back down to for the Bruins. So if they're not getting that piece, it makes it a lot harder than I think most people tend to realize. I mean, the biggest trade that you thought was going to happen was Wideman and Eriksson, and that obviously didn't happen once the suspension came down for Dennis Wideman. But if that's the best you can do in this market, I mean, as tough as this is to say, you may as well hang on to this guy and try to see if you can make a run this year.
Well, I mean, I think that, and if you look, and I know we talked about this on a previous webcast about a Boston-Anaheim type of deal. The thing is, Anaheim is scoring now, so they don't really need Louis Eriksson. So if Sweeney's goal was to get whoever Anaheim is willing to move, whether it be Vatanen or Lindholm or Dupre or even Cam Fowler, they'd probably have to give up one of the first-round picks that they drafted this year.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure if that's something that would interest Bob Murray. I think, I don't think that like Louis Eriksson is at the top of their list right now. I know they probably are looking for scoring at the deadline, but I don't think they are willing to give up. And they have excess defensemen, but I think they're looking for something more, maybe even something they can hold on to for a number of years, because these RFAs, you re-sign them, you have them for probably $4.5 million for 5 or 6 years. I mean, Louis Eriksson is an expiring contract. LeBron is right. I mean, Eric Stahl might get a first-round pick in a deal, but he's Eric Stahl. He's a star player. Louis Eriksson has never been a star player. He's a good player, but he's not a star player.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a lot of it comes back down to the money that would go to Louis Eriksson is Brad Marchand's money. And Marchand's been a force this year for the Bruins, so I think a lot of it comes back down to the Bruins don't necessarily want to sort of hamstring themselves yet again and be unable to pay one of their young stars.
Peter, do you think the Jets are looking for a first-round pick in a deal for Ladd, or do you think that's realistic that they could get a first-round pick for Ladd?
I think they could get one, but it's going to be a low one. So you're basically looking at a low first or a high, and I think they would prefer to have an asset to come back that isn't a lottery pick, like a late round draft pick. I think they prefer a prospect that they are that they know and can scout on, have been scouting. But I mean, that's up to anyone. I mean, there's no real, other than them having camped out in Buffalo for most of the season, there's no real info on where the Jets or who the Jets have been scouting. A little bit in Philly too, but that's it. So there's no real indication of, is there even a player or a target of who they would move Ladd to? But yeah, I think they'd want something more tangible than a draft pick, but that's just my opinion. They may take a draft pick and be happy.
Right. Yeah, and one last point though on the show. I mean, when you look at the rental market, there are a lot of confusing situations. I mean, there are a lot of teams that are not out of it. And then there are teams like I mean with Boston with Erickson, with the Rangers with Keith Yandel, and now Darren Drager said earlier in the week that McDonough being concussed would maybe take Yandel off the market. I agree with Russ Cohen, who follows the Rangers and said, that probably McDonough is going to be back before February 29th. So the Rangers are in a similar position. They know that they can't sign Yandel, so they probably are going to have to trade him because they have to get value back for him, because after giving up Duclair and a first-round pick, if they don't get value back from him, that was a horrendous deal.
Yeah.
And I don't think there are deals out there like last year where a team is going to trade for a player comparable to Antoine Vermette for a first-round pick. I mean, Chicago, Washington, Dallas might be willing to trade a first-round pick for the right type of player. I mean, with Washington, I think it would be a defenseman. With Dallas, I think it would be a defenseman. Chicago, I think it would be probably all of them would be defensemen.
Yeah. But they probably all calling Jim Benning asking about Dan Hamius.
And from what I heard, Hamius is not interested in waiving his no-trade clause.
Exactly.
So right now, if Keith Yandel is not traded and Dan Hamius does not waive his no-trade clause, the potential number one defenseman on the rental market is Roman Polak. That's bad.
Yeah.
On that note, thank you, Peter Tessier, for joining us. Thank you, Ty Anderson. We will be back on Monday for another edition of the Hockey Buzzcast. Remember, without the buzz, it's just hockey.